I walked into my childhood home to find my brother Derek screwing my ex-wife Madison on the living room couch where we'd had family Christmas mornings for 30 years, while my parents were upstairs pretending not to hear the betrayal happening under the roof I'd been paying for with my $2,800 monthly mortgage payments for the past 5 years. The affair had been going on for months while Derek played the supportive brother during my divorce, offering shoulders to cry on and advice about letting Madison go, while he was actively stealing her behind my back. I'd been working overtime as a civil engineer to keep my parents' retirement comfortable, funding their house payments while Derek job hopped between minimum wage positions and lived off their generosity and my financial support. But the most soul-crushing part wasn't catching them together. It was my parents' reaction when I confronted them about hosting my wife-stealing brother and his new girlfriend for their weekly Sunday dinners. Mom actually smiled when she delivered the line that would change everything. "We don't take sides in family matters. Derek and Madison are happy together and we're not going to punish them for finding love." Dad nodded along with smug satisfaction, like they'd figured out the perfect solution to an awkward family situation. "We love everyone equally," he said, cutting his steak, while Madison held Derek's hand at the dinner table I was paying for. "Family stays together no matter what happens between individuals." They were so proud of their diplomatic neutrality, so pleased with themselves for staying above the drama, that they never considered what would happen when the son funding their comfortable lifestyle decided their neutrality had a price tag attached. "We don't take sides," they said with such moral superiority, but they were about to discover that when you bite the hand that feeds you, you starve in the cold while watching your golden child abandon you the moment you actually need him. To understand how my family could so casually choose neutrality over basic decency, you need to know about the financial foundation that had been keeping their comfortable retirement afloat for the past 5 years. When Dad's pension fell short and Mom's Social Security couldn't cover their mortgage, I'd stepped in without hesitation to ensure they could stay in the house they'd raised us in. $2,800 every month automatically transferred from my account to theirs, covering the mortgage payment that would have forced them into a cramped apartment or elderly housing otherwise. 5 years of never missing a payment, never complaining about the financial strain, never asking for gratitude or recognition, just quietly making sure my parents could maintain their dignity and independence in their golden years. They'd grown so comfortable with my support that they'd forgotten it was support at all, treating my monthly payments like some kind of natural law rather than a conscious choice I made every month to prioritize their well-being over my own financial growth. For 5 years, I'd been paying their $2,800 monthly mortgage so they could retire comfortably, and they'd forgotten that generosity was a choice, not an obligation. But the family dynamic that made their neutrality possible had been years in the making, rooted in a lifetime of Derek being the charming golden child who could do no wrong while I played the role of the responsible older brother who took care of everyone else's problems. Derek had charisma and charm, the kind of personality that made people want to protect him from consequences, while I had competence and reliability traits that made me useful but never precious. When Derek dropped out of college, it was because traditional education wasn't right for everyone. When he lost jobs, it was always because of difficult managers or unfair treatment. When he moved back home at 28, it was temporary and just until he got back on his feet. Meanwhile, my civil engineering degree and stable career were treated like lucky accidents rather than the result of years of hard work and responsible choices. The pattern had been the same for decades. Derek's failures were explained away while my successes were expected and unremarkable. Derek was the charming golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the responsible one who paid the bills and received no credit for keeping the family stable. Looking back now, Derek's sudden interest in my marriage problems should have been a red flag the size of a billboard, but I'd been too trusting to see the predatory calculation behind his supportive brother act. Madison and I had been growing apart for months, struggling with the kind of communication issues that plagued couples who'd married young and were discovering they wanted different things from life. Derek had positioned himself as the understanding brother-in-law, offering Madison a sympathetic ear when I was working late on engineering projects, and she felt lonely. He'd been so helpful during our rough patches, so concerned about our happiness, so eager to provide comfort when things got difficult between us. I'd actually been grateful for his support, thinking it showed how much he'd matured since his college dropout days and string of failed jobs. The 3-year marriage that was supposed to be my fresh start had become the hunting ground where my golden child brother stalked my wife while pretending to care about our relationship. Derek had been so supportive during my divorce. Now I knew why he was so interested in helping Madison through our marriage problems. The phone call that would change everything came on a Thursday evening with Mom using her cheerful family coordinator voice to extend the weekly Sunday dinner invitation like nothing earth-shattering had happened to our family dynamics. But this time there was a casual addition that made my blood run cold. "Derek and Madison will be joining us this week," she said with the same tone she'd used to mention bringing dessert. "They're so happy together, and we thought it would be nice to have the whole family around the table again." The audacity was breathtaking. They were inviting me to Sunday dinner with my brother and the ex-wife he'd stolen from me, expecting me to sit around their dining room table and make polite conversation while watching the two people who'd betrayed me hold hands over the pot roast I was indirectly paying for. Mom invited me to Sunday dinner like nothing had changed, except now Derek and Madison would be there as a couple, and I was supposed to pretend that was perfectly normal. Sunday arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes terrible moments feel inevitable, and I walked into my parents' formal dining room to find Derek and Madison already seated at the table, looking comfortable and established like they'd been coming to family dinners together for years instead of months. Madison had her hand resting possessively on Derek's arm, and both of them looked up at me with the kind of defiant confidence that comes from knowing they had parental protection. Mom bustled around serving dinner while making bright conversation about Derek's latest job interview, and Dad carved the roast with ceremonial precision, both of them acting like this was just another normal family gathering instead of a moral abomination happening at the table I was financing. "You're really going to sit here and pretend this is normal family dinner?" I asked while they held hands at the table I was paying for, my voice cutting through the fake cheerfulness like a knife through tissue paper. That's when Dad set down his carving knife and delivered the speech that would seal all of their fates. "We don't take sides in family matters," he announced with the kind of moral authority that comes from complete delusion. "Derek and Madison found happiness together, and we're not going to punish them for that. Family stays together no matter what happens between individuals." Mom nodded enthusiastically, adding her own contribution to the gaslighting session. "We love everyone equally," she said, looking at me like I was the problem for not embracing this beautiful new family configuration. "This is what mature families do. We support each other through changes instead of holding grudges." "We don't take sides," Dad announced, like hosting my wife-stealing brother was just keeping the peace instead of choosing betrayal over loyalty. What followed that first disastrous Sunday dinner was a systematic normalization campaign that made the betrayal feel even more insulting with each passing week. Every Sunday without fail, Mom would call with the same cheerful invitation, and every Sunday I'd walk into that dining room to find Derek and Madison more comfortable and established at the family table I was financing through my mortgage payments. They'd started bringing wine to dinner, expensive bottles that Derek couldn't afford on his latest minimum wage job, but somehow managed to purchase for these weekly celebrations of their affair. Mom would gush over their thoughtfulness while setting out the good china, and Dad would make toasts about family togetherness that somehow always seemed directed at me, like I was the one disrupting harmony by refusing to celebrate my brother stealing my wife. The worst part was watching them develop inside jokes and shared memories right in front of me, creating a new family dynamic that pushed me further toward the outside of my own family circle with every gathering. Every Sunday, Mom would set the table for 5 like we were one big happy family with no betrayals to acknowledge, and I was supposed to smile while they normalized my humiliation. Derek's behavior during these dinners became increasingly possessive and arrogant as he realized that parental protection extended to his relationship with Madison. He'd put his arm around her chair, feed her bites of food, and make references to our plans and our future like he was marking territory that had once belonged to me. The golden child confidence that had protected him from consequences his entire life was now protecting his affair, and he seemed to take genuine pleasure in flaunting the relationship in front of me while our parents smiled approvingly. He'd make comments about how much happier Madison was now, how they were perfect together, and how sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to. When he started talking about moving in together and making long-term plans, he'd look directly at me while speaking like he wanted to make sure I understood that he wasn't just borrowing my ex-wife temporarily, he was keeping her permanently. Derek started acting like the house belonged to him, making plans for our family while I paid for the roof over his head and watched him steal everything that had once been mine. Meanwhile, my parents had perfected the art of financial manipulation, disguised as family concern, dropping hints about how much the mortgage payments meant to their quality of life, while simultaneously expecting me to fund the very dinners where they celebrated my betrayal. Mom would mention how grateful they were for my support, then immediately invite me to watch Derek and Madison's relationship flourish at the table that support made possible. Dad would talk about how family was all that really mattered when you got to their age, then spend the evening treating my wife-stealing brother like the son who'd made them proud, while I sat there writing the checks that kept their comfortable retirement possible. They wanted my money and my silence, my financial support, and my emotional surrender. Family is all we have, Mom said while I paid their mortgage and they hosted my betrayers like loyalty was a one-way street that only I was expected to travel. But the most painful realization was how systematically I was being pushed out of my own family while the people who'd betrayed me were being welcomed deeper into the inner circle. Derek and Madison had their own special jokes with my parents, their own shared memories from these weekly dinners, their own comfortable dynamic that made me feel like an unwelcome guest at gatherings I was literally funding. I'd started dreading Sunday phone calls, started making excuses to avoid dinners, started feeling like the problem child in a family where the actual problem was being celebrated and encouraged every week. The people who'd raised me, who'd taught me about right and wrong, were now gaslighting me into believing that basic moral boundaries were unreasonable expectations. I was paying for their house while being treated like a guest who wasn't really welcome at my own family table, and they acted like my discomfort was the real problem that needed to be solved. After weeks of watching my family celebrate my betrayal while I funded their comfortable lifestyle, I reached the breaking point that would change all of our lives forever. I sat down at my computer and composed the email that would force them to make a choice they'd been too cowardly to make on their own. The subject line was simple: family support, required decision. The message was even simpler: you have 30 days to decide whether you want to continue hosting Derek and Madison at family dinners or continue receiving my $2,800 monthly mortgage payments. You can't have both. Choose carefully. I attached 5 years of bank statements showing every payment I'd made every month. I'd prioritized their comfort over my own financial growth every time I'd quietly supported their retirement without asking for recognition or gratitude. The documentation made it clear that this wasn't an empty threat or an emotional outburst. It was a business decision with clear terms and consequences. I sent an email giving them 30 days to choose between hosting my betrayers and keeping their house because their neutrality was about to cost them everything. The family's reaction to my ultimatum was exactly what I'd expected from people who'd spent years taking my financial support for granted: dismissive laughter and confident predictions that I'd calm down and come to my senses once I realized how unreasonable I was being about family harmony. Mom called first, using her disappointed mother voice to explain how I was overreacting and being vindictive about something that had nothing to do with their mortgage payments. "You're trying to control who we have in our own home," she said, like I wasn't the one making that home possible in the first place. Dad took a different approach, using his business-minded tone to suggest that I was making emotional decisions that I'd regret later. "Family is forever," he said, "but grudges are just temporary feelings that fade with time. Don't do something you'll be sorry about when you're thinking more clearly." "He's just having a tantrum," Derek told them, like I hadn't been deadly serious about the ultimatum I'd spent weeks planning and documenting. But the most insulting response came from Madison, who had the audacity to call me directly and try to exploit whatever emotional connection we might have left from our 3 years of marriage. She used the soft, vulnerable voice that had once made me want to protect her, telling me through tears that she never wanted to destroy the family and couldn't. I see that she and Derek were truly in love in a way that was meant to be. "You're tearing apart people who love you," she said, like she hadn't torn apart our marriage by sleeping with my brother behind my back. "This isn't about choosing sides, this is about forgiveness and letting people find happiness where they can." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable, but it proved that even my ex-wife thought I was weak enough to be guilted into funding my own humiliation. Madison called crying about destroying the family, like she hadn't destroyed our marriage by sleeping with my brother while I paid for the roof over their heads. Derek's response was the most predictable of all escalation to threats and intimidation when he realized that his golden child protection might not extend to financial consequences. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, using his most aggressive posture to try to intimidate me into backing down from the ultimatum. "You need to stop causing problems for mom and dad," he said, standing in my doorway like he had any authority over my choices. "They're getting older and this stress isn't good for them. If you keep pushing this ultimatum nonsense, I'm gonna have to handle it myself." The irony was incredible. The brother who'd stolen my wife was now threatening to handle me for refusing to fund the family dinners where they celebrated their affair. Derek threatened to handle me if I didn't stop causing problems, still thinking mom and dad would protect him from the consequences of his betrayal. While my family dismissed my ultimatum as an emotional tantrum that would blow over, I spent the following weeks systematically documenting the complete scope of their financial dependence on my generosity and the utter impossibility of replacing my support with anything Derek or Madison could provide. The mortgage documentation alone was a masterpiece of evidence that would destroy any remaining illusions about who held the real power in our family dynamic. My name was on every mortgage document as the sole financially responsible party, with my parents listed as the beneficiaries of my payments, but having zero legal obligation or ability to make payments themselves. 5 years of bank statements showed an unbroken record of $2,800 transfers on the 15th of every month, never late, never missed, never even questioned until now. But the most damning evidence was the loan application paperwork from when they'd first gotten the mortgage, which showed that without my co-signing and payment guarantee, they would never have qualified for a loan that large in the first place. Their retirement income alone couldn't even cover the property taxes and insurance, let alone the principal and interest payments that I'd been handling since day one. The mortgage documents showed my name as sole responsible party. Their house was legally my financial responsibility, which meant it was also my leverage to use however I saw fit. The analysis of my parents' financial situation without my support was even more devastating than I'd expected, revealing just how completely they'd become dependent on my monthly contributions to maintain their comfortable retirement lifestyle. Dad's pension provided $1,800 monthly, and Mom's Social Security added another $1,200. A total of $3,000 that had to cover all their living expenses. After accounting for utilities, groceries, insurance, medical expenses, and basic maintenance, they had maybe $200 left over each month for discretionary spending. The mortgage payment I'd been covering was larger than their entire discretionary budget, and without my support, they'd be facing foreclosure within 3 months of missing payments. But the real eye-opener was discovering that they'd been using my mortgage payment coverage as an excuse to live beyond their means in other areas, accumulating credit card debt and taking out small loans because they knew their housing costs were secure. Their total monthly obligations actually exceeded their income by nearly $800, making my support even more critical than I'd realized. Without my $2,800 monthly payments, they had maybe 3 months before foreclosure proceedings began, and their actual debt obligations exceeded their retirement income by $800 monthly. Meanwhile, my investigation into Derek's employment history revealed the complete fantasy underlying my family's assumption that the golden child could somehow step up and replace my financial contributions if I followed through on my ultimatum. In the past 3 years alone, Derek had worked at 6 different jobs, never lasting more than 8 months at any position before being fired for poor performance, attendance issues, or attitude problems. His current unemployment streak had lasted 4 months, with his most recent job ending when he was terminated from a retail position for chronic tardiness and argumentative behavior toward customers. The unemployment benefits he'd been receiving were about to expire, and his job search efforts consisted mainly of online applications for positions he was completely unqualified for. Madison's financial contribution was equally laughable. $15 an hour at a part-time retail job that gave her maybe 25 hours per week when she was lucky. Together, their combined monthly income was less than what I paid in mortgage alone, and that was when Derek was actually employed. Derek had been unemployed for 4 months and Madison made $15 an hour part-time. Together, they couldn't even pay for groceries, let alone a $2,800 mortgage. But perhaps the most satisfying evidence I'd collected was the communication record that documented my family's complete disrespect for my boundaries and their confident assumption that I was too weak to follow through on my ultimatum. I'd saved every mocking text message, every dismissive voicemail, every condescending email that treated my serious financial ultimatum like a child's tantrum. Mom's voicemail calling me dramatic and vindictive. Dad's text saying I needed to grow up and stop making threats. Derek's message laughing about how I'd calm down and get over it like always. Madison's tearful voicemail about how I was destroying innocent people's happiness for no reason. I saved every mocking text and dismissive voicemail, building a portfolio of their complete disrespect for my boundaries and their confidence that I was too weak to follow through. The final piece of my preparation was researching the real estate market and estate sale options that would become relevant once my family's comfortable denial crashed into financial reality. I'd contacted 3 different estate sale companies, researched comparable home values in their neighborhood, and calculated the timeline between missed payments and foreclosure proceedings. The house would sell quickly in the current market, but the proceeds would barely cover the remaining mortgage balance after realtor fees and legal costs. My parents would be left with maybe $10,000 and the need to find affordable rental housing on their fixed income. I researched estate sale companies and realtors preparing for the reality my family refused to acknowledge. Their comfortable retirement was entirely dependent on my generosity. When the 30-day deadline arrived and my family still hadn't made a choice, I implemented the financial cutoff strategy I'd been planning with the precision of an engineering project. I canceled every automatic payment, called the bank to remove my authorization for mortgage transfers, and sent a certified letter to my parents' lender explaining that I was withdrawing financial support effective immediately. The bank notifications went out on a Tuesday morning informing my parents that their mortgage payment was now overdue and they had 15 days to bring their account current before late fees began accumulating. I also canceled the emergency credit card I'd given them for household expenses. The utilities backup payment I'd set up when Dad had forgotten to pay the electric bill, and the grocery store account I'd maintained for their convenience. For the first time in 5 years, my parents were completely responsible for their own financial obligations, and the reality of their situation became crystal clear within hours of the payment stopping. I canceled every automatic payment and notified the bank that I was withdrawing financial support effective immediately, leaving my parents completely responsible for obligations they couldn't afford. The family's panic response was swift and desperate, transforming weeks of dismissive confidence into frantic damage control that proved they'd finally understood the seriousness of their situation. Mom called 17 times on the first day alone, progressing from confused questions to angry accusations to sobbing pleas as the reality of foreclosure became undeniable. "You can't just abandon family like this," she cried during one particularly dramatic voicemail. "We raised you better than to use money as a weapon against people who love you. This isn't about Derek and Madison anymore. This is about you becoming someone cruel and vindictive." Dad tried a different approach, alternating between businessman logic and guilt-tripping about their age and health. "You're destroying our retirement over a grudge," he said during one of his increasingly desperate phone calls. "We're too old to start over, and you know we can't afford this house without your help." Suddenly, I was getting 20 calls a day from people who'd been laughing about my tantrum just weeks before, and their panic proved they'd finally realized I was serious about my ultimatum. Meanwhile, Derek's attempts to step up and replace my financial contributions were failing spectacularly, providing daily evidence of why the golden child had never been asked to contribute anything meaningful to family stability. His job search efforts consisted mainly of online applications submitted from my parents' couch while he ate food they could no longer afford to buy. The few interviews he managed to secure ended poorly, with employers unimpressed by his spotty work history and entitled attitude about wages and responsibilities. His unemployment benefits had expired, and his attempts to get emergency loans were rejected due to his poor credit history and lack of steady income. Madison's increased hours at her retail job brought in an extra $100 per week, which didn't even cover the groceries Derek was consuming while he focused on finding the right opportunity. Derek's attempts to get loans or decent employment failed spectacularly, proving he was useless when the family actually needed him to contribute instead of just consuming resources. But the most satisfying development was watching my parents' preparation for the estate sale that would liquidate their comfortable retirement and force them into the financial reality they'd been avoiding. The estate sale company started advertising their belongings online, scheduling the liquidation for 3 weeks after their first missed mortgage payment. Neighbors began stopping by to ask questions about the sale, creating the kind of public scrutiny that my image-conscious parents had always dreaded. The house they'd been so proud of the retirement lifestyle, they'd worked decades to achieve the comfortable independence they'd thought was secure. All of it was being dismantled and sold off because they'd chosen to host my betrayers over maintaining the relationship with the son who'd been funding their dream. The estate sale company started advertising their belongings online, while my parents still hoped Derek would somehow save them, but their golden child was proving as useless at crisis management as he'd always been at everything else. The estate sale day arrived with strangers rifling through my parents' belongings, while neighbors whispered about the foreclosure that had shocked their quiet retirement community. 40 years of possessions were spread across folding tables with price stickers from Dad's tools to Mom's china, all reduced to bargain hunting opportunities. My parents sat on their porch looking defeated, watching their life's accumulations being sold off piece by piece. Watching strangers rifle through my parents' belongings while neighbors whispered about the foreclosure was exactly the reality check my family had avoided for months. The family's desperate final appeal happened in full view of the estate sale crowd, with Mom approaching me near the driveway for one last attempt at emotional manipulation. "Please," she said loud enough for neighbors to hear, "we know we made mistakes, but you're destroying this family over hurt feelings. Your father has chest pains from the stress. We're begging you to stop this before it's too late." Dad joined with his own performance of regretful authority. "We understand you're angry about Derek and Madison, but this punishment doesn't fit the crime. We want to make things right, but you have to give us a chance to fix this as a family." They were asking me to save their house while still refusing to acknowledge that hosting my betrayers had been a choice with consequences. "You're destroying this family," Mom sobbed in front of the estate sale crowd, still refusing to acknowledge that their neutrality had been a choice with consequences. But the most satisfying moment came when Derek and Madison made their dramatic exit, abandoning my parents exactly when the golden child was finally needed. They'd arrived with a U-Haul truck, ostensibly to help, but instead spent the day loading their belongings and preparing to flee the crisis they'd helped create. Derek's departure speech was delivered in front of neighbors and customers, getting an education in family dysfunction. "This whole situation has become too toxic," he announced, loading boxes while my parents watched in horror. "We can't be around this kind of negativity and manipulation." Madison added her contribution to the betrayal. "We tried to help, but some people just want to destroy everyone's happiness. We have to protect our relationship and our peace of mind." They drove away during the sale, leaving my parents surrounded by strangers buying their possessions, finally understanding which child would abandon them when actually needed versus which had been quietly providing support for years. Derek and Madison drove away during the estate sale, abandoning my parents when they finally needed the golden child to actually help instead of just taking resources. The forced acknowledgement came when Dad found me near the book table where a neighbor was haggling over his vintage engineering manuals. His voice was barely above a whisper, but several people heard him deliver the admission that should have come months earlier. "We chose wrong," he said, looking at the ground. "We thought we could have it both ways, keep everyone happy, avoid taking sides. But Derek just abandoned us when we needed him, and you've been supporting us for 5 years without asking for anything until we betrayed your trust." Mom joined with her reluctant confession to an audience of neighbors. "We should have stood by you when Derek stole your wife. We were cowards who took your loyalty for granted while enabling people who didn't deserve protection. We chose wrong," Dad admitted in front of the estate sale crowd, finally acknowledging what their neutrality had cost them and which son had actually been loyal. Standing in their driveway surrounded by neighbors and strangers with their belongings on folding tables and their golden child gone, I offered them one last opportunity to salvage something from their retirement wreckage. "You have one choice left," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Apologize publicly for hosting my betrayers and promise never to contact Derek or Madison again, or finish this sale and find an apartment you can afford on your pension. You can't have my support and their friendship. Pick one." The crowd went quiet, sensing they were witnessing neighborhood history. My parents looked at each other, then at strangers buying their possessions, then at the empty driveway where Derek's truck had been. Choose now, I said in front of everyone. The son who pays your bills or the son who abandoned you when you needed him. The choice was made quickly and publicly witnessed by a crowd that would validate the decision. We choose you, Mom said with desperate clarity. Derek abandoned us, but you're here offering to help even after we betrayed you. We choose loyalty over the people who used us and left us with nothing. Dad nodded with heavy understanding. We choose the son who showed up when it mattered, not the one who disappeared when we needed him. In front of the entire neighborhood, my parents finally chose the son who'd been loyal over the one who'd stolen and abandoned, but only after losing everything to learn the difference. The aftermath of that estate sale was swift and comprehensive for everyone involved, creating a new family structure built on actual accountability rather than the comfortable lies that had enabled betrayal for so long. My parents moved into a modest two-bedroom apartment that they could afford on their pension under my financial supervision that included monthly budget reviews and pre-approved expenses only. The days of taking my support for granted were over, replaced by a relationship where my help came with clear expectations about loyalty and respect. Sunday dinners resumed, but now they happened at my house with my rules, and Derek and Madison's names were never mentioned at my table. Mom and Dad learned to live within their means for the first time in years, discovering that retirement could still be comfortable when you weren't funding other people's betrayals or hosting elaborate dinners for ungrateful golden children who disappeared the moment actual support was needed. My parents moved to a small apartment under my financial supervision, having learned that neutrality isn't an option when family betrays family, and my support came with clear expectations about loyalty. Meanwhile, Derek and Madison's situation deteriorated rapidly without the family safety net that Derek had relied on his entire life, providing daily evidence of what happens when golden children have to survive on charm alone. Derek's job search continued to fail spectacularly, with employers unimpressed by his attitude and work history, while Madison's part-time retail income couldn't support two adults with expensive tastes. They'd moved in together in a cramped studio apartment where Derek's unemployment and Madison's minimum wage job created the kind of financial stress that destroyed relationships faster than they could blame external circumstances. Within 6 months, Madison had left Derek for someone with better prospects, proving that affairs built on betrayal don't create lasting foundations for love. Derek and Madison struggled without the family safety net he'd always relied on. Learning too late that betrayal has consequences and golden child protection doesn't extend to the real world. Looking back now, I realize that forcing my family to make a choice was the most loving thing I could have done, because it finally taught them the difference between enabling betrayal and maintaining actual family bonds built on mutual respect and loyalty. "We don't take sides" had been cowards' language for avoiding moral clarity, a way to benefit from my generosity while refusing to defend me when I needed them most. Real family doesn't host Sunday dinners for people who steal. Your spouse doesn't expect you to fund your own humiliation and doesn't mistake neutrality for wisdom when basic decency requires taking a stand. My parents learned too late that some choices define your character, and choosing comfort over justice always comes with a price. "We don't take sides" is just cowards' language for enabling betrayal. Real family protects the loyal and holds the betrayers accountable, even when it's uncomfortable.